Hello, welcome to Limited Insight. Today marks the start of a 10-part series where we're going to document the build of our granny annex. This is to be built in the garden of our home and will be home to my mother, who's now in her late 70s. So if you're thinking of building an annex for a granny or not, this series will show you the process from start to finish. It won't be so much for the self-builder, but more for somebody likely to get a contractor in to do the work. It should give you a much better understanding of what is involved, how easy or difficult the project may be, and may put some of your concerns to rest. In the final part of the series, we'll be discussing the costs involved and of course show you the finished product. I hope you'll enjoy, so let's get into it. So first of all, why build an annex and why am I building one? Well, there are lots of great reasons to build an annex. They're becoming very popular these days for home offices, games rooms, gyms or home bars. But myself, I'm building one for my mother, so affectionately known as a Granny Annexe or a Grannex. It will simply be a small dwelling for a person. The scenario for us, my mother found her home to be getting a bit too much for her, a bit too much land to take care of, etc. Ideally, it would have been great to get her in a bungalow, but have you seen the prices of bungalows these days? It is absolutely crazy. So for the price that she got for her semi-detached house, there was absolutely no way she was going to get in a bungalow. So she would have needed an extra 50 to 70 grand at least, and that money just was not available. We looked at park homes, but they are quite expensive, at least £140,000 for a decent sized one, and then you have to pay ground rent on top of that, and then there are also the costs of replacing those units once they reach 25 years old. So that didn't seem to be a viable option either, which left really this. So I floated the idea past my mother. Fortunately, we've got a decent sized garden and we happen to have a spot which would suit an annex perfectly. It just comprised of a greenhouse and a few bushes and a bit of gravel. It wasn't really being utilised well, so made the ideal spot to build something. So initially we looked at prefab garden rooms. There are quite a few companies online doing these. Unfortunately, we quickly found that many didn't want to construct for a dwelling, so they're fine if it was not to be lived in, but when it came to a property to be lived in, certain more standards have to be conformed to, and I found that most weren't happy to do that. And those that were wanted huge premiums, £50,000 to £80,000 for the building, and that's on top of footings. And considering the shorter lifespan on those types of buildings, that didn't seem to be a very viable option either. So that left us building from scratch, which initially seemed quite daunting, you know, having to find a builder, get architects involved, go through all of the processes to get it out of the ground. So there's no doubt that building from scratch is not the simplest method, but it is the most cost effective, and it allows us to get a bespoke building that is going to be around for as long as the main house. So we opted for a 35 square metre property, 5.5 metres wide at its widest and 8.5 metres long. The internal space being 8 metres by 5 metres at one end and 4 metres at the other. This comprises of a generous double bedroom, ensuite shower room and a living area with kitchen and dining space. The building itself will be part timber clad, part rendered, with 3 floor-to-ceiling windows in the living space and French doors to the rear for access to the property and patio area. The roof will be pitched with tiles. So that's what was submitted for planning. We enlisted an architect to draw up the plans and they submitted the application on our behalf. It took around 8 weeks to get approval and the council didn't really present any challenges. All in all, this process was actually fairly painless. We had to post a letter on the lamppost outside our house for about 21 days so neighbours could see what we were up to and give them a chance to object. Our boundary neighbours were also written to. So despite being perched on top of this excavator, I'm not actually going to be doing any of the building work. We have a contractor in place to pretty much deliver the entire project, bar a few things inside, which we'll go over at a later date. So we found a builder after getting a handful of quotes in. We didn't necessarily go with the cheapest, but the ones that provided the most comprehensive breakdown of the work, and also the one that we felt the most comfortable with and would provide the best quality. So we booked them in with a provisional date and planning was submitted. Fortunately, planning came in just as expected and we ended up sticking to the original provisional date with the builder, and work started on the project in early April. So in this series of videos we're going to go through, like I said, the process from start to finish. At the moment, as you can see, we're about 3 weeks in, so we are going to rewind and show you the project from what this site looked like to begin with to hopefully a beautiful finished building. So let's get into it. So this was the site. As you can see, it is home to a greenhouse, conifer, a few shrubs and plants and gravel. It's actually a pretty pointless portion of the garden, so won't really be missed, making it a perfect spot for this annex. So the first job was to remove everything from the plot and scrape the land. So came dealing with the main challenges of the site, the split levels. Strong ramps needed to be built in order to make the site accessible for the workmen, excavator and dumper truck. They could then get all the unwanted greenery and soil out and all materials in. So as you can see from these lovely drone images, that the garden is on 3 different levels. So we've got like a patio area immediately outside of the house. Then it steps up into a couple of lawns where we keep our hot tub, and then we've got a level even higher up, quite a few steps to get up there, where there's more lawn and the plot where we're going to sit the annex. So that was one of the main challenges for this project. It's getting everything out and getting everything in, because we've only got a relatively narrow entryway. The entryway itself isn't actually narrow at all, but at the corner of the house there's a large bush which doesn't belong to us, which we're having to kind of pussyfoot around. It makes it very difficult to get things in and out, and as such it's difficult to get out of that corner, which means we've had to go for the smallest possible excavator and dumper truck, which just means it takes that bit longer to get all the new materials out to the back of the garden. Many trips up and down with a dumper truck full of sand. But I've no doubt that this project would have been cheaper for us if we were dealing with a perfectly smooth, flat site with no access problems. But it is what it is, and I was actually quite pleased with the quotation considering the challenges. So this was the state of the plot after all shrubs and trees had been ripped out. At this point it still needed to be scraped back and levelled out, because of course it wasn't flat, it was higher at the top end of the garden than it was the bottom. They opted for a grabber lorry to take all the rubbish away rather than a skip. This process took less than a couple of days. By day 3 the site for the annex was flat and free from obstruction. They then started to dig the foundations for the annex. Building materials started to arrive, starting with the building blocks for the walls. By the end of the week and 4 days in, half of the foundations were dug and work was progressing pretty well. The plan is to finish the foundations on Monday morning, ready for inspection from the council, at which point we'll be ready to pour some concrete. So as this build is expected to take 10 to 12 weeks, I'm going to aim for 10 episodes for this series. So each week I'll update you with developments on site and how things are going. The final episode should be a bit longer because we're going to discuss the costs involved and summarise the experience really. So that's it for this one. We'll see you again next week. Thank you. Bye bye.